When the wind screams loud enough to make the rafters shiver, most folks run inside and hope their roof holds. But every so often, out here on the frontier, you meet a man who doesn't just hope he survives winter. He outsmarts it. 15 years ago, neighbors laughed when old Jonas Hale built a tiny cabin inside a collapsing barn. They called it foolish, wasteful, a sign that the old man had finally lost his mind. But when the Arctic storm rolled in and every cabin in this valley froze down to the last nail, it was Jonas's so-called crazy design that stayed 35 degrees warmer. And it was Jonas who kept half of us alive. Now, I don't tell this story to entertain you. I tell it because hidden inside that strange winter, there's a piece of frontier engineering that most Americans have forgotten. And a lesson that'll change the way you think about heat, about wind, and about how you build anything meant to keep your family safe. So pull your chair close, friend. This isn't just a story. It's a survival blueprint. There's something powerful about the men who choose to live close to the land, men who've learned to read the sky before the storm hits, men who know that warmth isn't something you burn, it's something you keep. Jonas Hale was one of those men. In the winter, he proved everyone wrong, still teaches me things every time I step out onto this old porch. 1. Setting the stage. The land, the wind, the men. The valley where this story happened sits tucked beneath a spine of broken hills, the kind of place where wind never walks. It runs. Folks who settle here learn fast that cold isn't just a season. It's a presence, a force, something that prowls the prairie at night, sniffing around your eaves, looking for a crack wide enough to steal the heat from your bones. Out here, winter doesn't test your house, it tests you. And that's why some men choose to build fast, cheap, and hopeful. Others build slow, stubborn, and ready. Jonas Hale belonged to the second kind. He wasn't a tall man, not anymore. His back had curled a little with age, like a branch bent too long against the wind. But his mind? Sharp as an axe that's never known rust. He had a way of looking at the land that made you think he was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. Some say it came from growing up in places where winter ruled like a tyrant. Others say he simply watched nature long enough to understand her rules. And then there were the neighbors. Owen Kettler, who built everything as quick and cheap as he could nail it together. Martha and Eli, a young couple who believed enthusiasm could outwork inexperience. And Carl Becker, a man who stayed quiet, watched everything, and never said what he truly thought. They were good people, hard-working frontier folk, but all of them shared one belief. You build your home facing the sun, keep the stove hot, pray winter is kind, and hope the wind doesn't find where you cut corners. Jonas didn't pray for mercy, he designed for war. And that winter, the land was already whispering warning signs. The birds flew lower, the cattle grew restless, and every sunrise carried a stillness that didn't feel natural. The old-timers were uneasy, and when the old men of the frontier get uneasy, you pay attention. To the foolish idea. Jonas chose that moment, when every neighbor was rushing to finish their cabins before the first snow, to do something that made the whole valley squint in confusion. Instead of repairing his worn-out little homestead cabin, he dragged his lumber into an abandoned barn behind his property. The barn leaned like a tired drunk. Its boards clattered when the wind touched them. Its roof sagged under years of neglect. Nobody, not one of us, could understand why a man would build inside a building that looked ready to collapse on its own shadow. But Jonas never hurried, never explained, never looked embarrassed. He marked out the footprint of a small, tight cabin, no bigger than a ranger station shack, and positioned it exactly 8 feet away from every barn wall. When Owen walked by and saw him pacing the interior with a measuring rope, he laughed out loud. "What are you doing, Jonas? Heating 2 roofs because one ain't enough?" Jonas didn't even look up. He just tapped his boot on the barn floor and said, "I'm not heating a roof, Owen. I'm building myself a shield." That only made Owen laugh harder. Soon the whole valley had an opinion. Some said Jonas was losing his mind. Others said an old man had no business wasting what little energy he had left on a double house. Eli joked that Jonas was building a frontier hotel for ghosts. Nobody took it seriously. But I remember standing there, watching how Jonas studied the way the afternoon wind curled around the barn, how he pressed his palm to the old siding, feeling where the draft pushed strongest. He wasn't building a home. He was mapping the enemy. Most folks build as if weather is something you manage from the inside. Jonas built like a man preparing to meet a predator on its own ground. He placed that little cabin exactly where the wind broke the weakest. He angled the roof so snow would stack against the barn, not against him. And he checked every measurement twice, sometimes 3 times, until his layout looked less like a construction site and more like a battlefield plan. Neighbors laughed louder each day, but Jonas just kept working with that quiet certainty that makes other men uncomfortable. And one evening, when the sky burned purple and the air bit hard enough to sting the lungs, I finally asked him, "Jonas, why 8 feet? Why here?" He wiped sawdust from his beard and said something I've never forgotten. "Because most folks build houses that fight the wind. I build houses that make the wind fight something else first." He smiled, small and deliberate. "And when the wind gets tired, that's when I stay warm." 3. What he knows. Lessons from an old world. Jonas didn't invent this idea out of thin air. The old man carried lessons the way some folks carry scars, quietly but always there when needed. He'd grown up far north, where the prairie stretches into cold country, and the people who survive aren't the ones who brag the loudest, but the ones who listen the deepest. And Jonas had listened to 2 men who shaped his entire understanding of winter. One was a Lakota elder named White Elk. In Jonas's youth, the old man had pointed across the frozen plains and said, "The wind owns this land. You only borrow your warmth from it." White Elk taught him how snow forms natural barriers, how a bend of willow can break a gust, and how the safest shelters on the prairie are the ones hidden behind something else. The second was a stout Scandinavian carpenter named Henrik, who knew more about cold than any man Jonas had ever met. Henrik believed in a truth that sounded simple, but most builders ignore even today. Still air is insulation. He showed Jonas how a double wall packed with straw could keep a cabin warm with half the wood everyone else burned. He explained how heat isn't something you win by fighting, it's something you protect by being patient, observant, and clever. Jonas carried those 2 teachers with him everywhere he went. When he looked at that leaning barn, he didn't see a ruin. He saw a giant outer wall that could break the wind, swallow its force, and calm the air before it reached the inner cabin. And when Jonas started working inside the barn, hands steady, eyes sharp, you could almost hear White Elk and old Henrik in every move he made. People thought Jonas was stubborn, but stubborn men dig their heels in blindly. Jonas wasn't stubborn. He was precise, quiet, intentional. He studied winter the way some men study scripture, believing that if you pay attention long enough, nature will tell you how she wants to be handled. That's the thing about wisdom. It rarely shouts. Most days it barely whispers. The trick is learning to hear it before the storm comes. 4. The building begins. Details that matter. The day Jonas started laying the subfloor, I watched him work with a kind of rhythm that comes only from someone who's fought winter and lost a few times before finally learning how to win. He raised the platform 18 inches off the ground, then packed the crawl space tight with straw mixed with sawdust. Most folks would have used dirt or left it hollow, but Jonas knew the truth. Warmth rises and cold sneaks in from the earth when you're not paying attention. Once the floor was in, he began notching lodgepole logs with that old Scandinavian notch. Tight, clean, no daylight between them. He didn't waste a single scrap. He used bark to plug microscopic seams, moss for the wider gaps, and a lime sand slurry that hardened like stone by the next morning. Every log felt intentional, like the wall itself was a living thing learning how to breathe. Then came the roof. Jonas built a low, heavy gable, not the tall, showy one people preferred. A low roof catches less wind, and a heavy one sleeps easy under snow. Above it was 8 full feet of barn airspace, another layer of what he called the quiet zone, where the wind died, the cold lost momentum, and the heat inside the cabin had time to settle instead of fleeing. But what shocked everyone most wasn't the cabin, it was the barn. Jonas climbed up and drilled tiny vents high in the gables, just large enough to let the outer shell breathe. Folks thought ventilation was the enemy of heat. Jonas knew the opposite. A suffocating barn rots. A barn that breathes lives longer than the men who built it. Owen stopped by that afternoon and shook his head. "Jonas, you're poking holes in the building meant to keep you warm." Jonas wiped sweat from his brow and said, "I'm letting the cold escape before it gets trapped where it shouldn't. A man who fears fresh air doesn't understand how wood survives winter." Even I didn't understand it fully at the time, but watching him mix craft, instinct, and that old-world wisdom, I realized Jonas wasn't just building shelter. He was crafting a machine, one designed not to generate warmth, but to preserve it. And out here, preservation beats production every time. 5. The mockery rises. Pressure from the community. By mid-October, word had spread across the valley that Jonas Hale was building a double cabin. People came just to stare. Some brought their kids so they could point and laugh, thinking it was good fun to mock an old man's ideas. But frontier laughter often hides frontier fear. When people don't understand something, their first instinct is to dismiss it, then to ridicule it. Only later do they listen. Owen, the loudest of them all, strutted around the barn with a grin that could peel paint. "You're heating 2 roofs, you'll burn twice the wood. Why build a cabin inside a cabin? Why not just wrap yourself in a blanket and call it engineering?" Jonas didn't fire back. He rarely did. He simply looked at Owen with the kind of calm that makes other men uncomfortable and said, "I'm not building 2 houses, Owen. I'm building a shield and a heart. One takes the beating. The other stays warm." But the pressure kept rising. Folks started placing bets in the mercantile. How long before Jonas abandoned the project, moved into town, or froze to death just to prove a point? Even the pastor made a gentle remark one Sunday that perhaps Jonas should seek simpler solutions, more in line with community wisdom. Jonas smiled politely, but later that night he told me, "Community wisdom is just the sum of everyone's mistakes, repeated long enough that people forget they were mistakes." I'll admit, even I wondered whether he was taking on too much. The barn creaked in the wind. Snow clouds were forming earlier than usual. And Jonas was no longer a young man. Yet every morning, he returned to that shadowed barn with the same steady determination, tightening chinking, sealing corners, adjusting airflow, running his hand along each wall as if checking a horse's ribs. The mockery didn't stop him. It shaped him, tested him, strengthened the resolve he'd carried since boyhood. You see, out on the frontier, a man doesn't prove himself by being right when things are easy. He proves himself by staying the course when the whole valley is watching, whispering, and waiting for him to fail. And winter was watching too. 6. Jonas's secret engineering: dead air, wind shadow, and heat pockets. When most folks think about staying warm, they think about fire. Bigger flames, hotter coals, more smoke rolling from the chimney. But Jonas had a different view. He believed warmth wasn't created inside a stove. Warmth was created by protecting what the stove gave you. And every move he made inside that barn proved he understood something far deeper than any of us realized. One cold afternoon, I found him crouched beside the inner wall, studying the faint movement of dust. He waved a hand slowly, watching how the air responded. "You see that?" he asked. "That's not wind, that's a thief." I didn't understand. He kept going. "Heat doesn't vanish, it escapes. It leaks, and the enemy pushing it out is always moving air." Then he told me what White Elk once said: "The wind doesn't need a doorway to enter your home. It only needs a doubt in your construction." Jonas tapped the gap between the barn wall and the cabin wall. "This space kills the wind's momentum. By the time cold air reaches my cabin, it's starving, weak, tired, and tired wind can't steal heat." That was the first time I ever heard the phrase dead air. Jonas said it like it was a sacred term. To him, still air was a second skin around the cabin, a silent armor. The barn broke the wind, redirected it, scattered it. The 8-foot buffer trapped the calmer air. And the tightly built cabin held the pocket of heat like a cupped hand around a flame. But Jonas didn't stop there. He angled the outer barn doors so wind slipped sideways instead of ramming head-on. He added a shallow wind lip at the base of the barn, just a board, really, but it forced the cold gusts upward instead of under the cabin. He even placed the stove in the exact center of the inner cabin to create balanced heat distribution, something most frontier cabins never achieve. "Every house has weak points," Jonas told me. "Mine just has fewer places for winter to attack." He didn't say it proudly. He said it like a man explaining how he planned to survive a battle. And that's when it hit me. Jonas wasn't building shelter from winter. He was building a strategy against it. 7. First cold snap. Warning signs. Winter arrived early that year, earlier than even the old-timers expected. The first cold snap hit in mid-November, dropping the temperature 20 degrees in a single night. Frost formed so thick on porch rails that it looked like white fur. Horses shivered even in the sheds, and for the first time, folks around the valley felt a whisper of unease. Owen's new cabin dropped to 42 degrees overnight, despite the stove burning hard. Eli and Martha's little place dipped below freezing around dawn. Their water pail had a sheet of ice thick enough to tap like glass. People began to wonder aloud whether the coming winter might be harsher than usual. Meanwhile, Jonas kept a small board hung by a nail in the barn, his temperature ledger as he called it. Every morning, he recorded 3 readings: outside, barn interior, and inner cabin. That first cold snap gave him numbers that made his eyes sharpen with quiet satisfaction. Outside, 12 degrees. Inside the barn, 27 degrees. Inside the cabin, 55 degrees. A difference of 40+ degrees between the open prairie and Jonas's inner room. And here's what shocked me the most. He wasn't even burning that much wood. Maybe 2 armloads a day. The fire wasn't raging. It was steady, calm, controlled. The barn held the wind at bay. The buffer zone slowed heat loss. The cabin held the heart of the warmth. Heat isn't something you push, Jonas said as he scribbled the numbers. It's something you slow down. But while Jonas grew more certain of his design, the neighbors grew more unsettled. That first cold snap was just a preview, like the first low rumble before a mountain collapses. And out on the plains, when nature gives you a preview, the main event is never far behind. 8. The real storm arrives, the test of a lifetime. The storm came on January 14th. No buildup, no warning. One moment the air was still. The next, the sky cracked open and unleashed a roar like some ancient beast waking from hibernation. The barometric pressure dropped so fast my ears popped. Snow didn't fall, it flew sideways, a white fury that erased the world beyond 20 feet. By noon, the temperature had plummeted to 40 below. By evening, 60-mile winds hammered every wall, every roof, every mistake a builder ever made. Cabins groaned like ships caught in a storm, shutters tore loose, tar paper slapped like frightened wings. And inside those thin-walled homes, families fought a losing battle against a cold that crept under doors, through nail holes, between every joint where haste had replaced skill. Owen's cabin dropped to 28 degrees despite a stove burning so hot the pipe glowed orange. Eli and Martha huddled under quilts with their baby, trying to heat just the air around their bodies. A family 2 miles south lost their roof past midnight. The land was punishing every corner cut, every shortcut taken, every act of confidence not backed by engineering. Meanwhile, Jonas's barn, old, tired, leaning, took the full force of the storm like a silent guard. The wind slammed into the outer walls and broke into harmless currents. Snow piled in deep drifts against the barn's north face, adding unexpected insulation. And inside that cavern of timber and shadow, the air stayed strangely calm. When Jonas opened the inner cabin door the next morning, the thermometer read 41 degrees. Cold, but safe, livable, survivable. The kind of temperature where a man can still think straight, still work, still fight. Outside, it was 45 below and dropping. And that's when it happened. Just after dawn, a knocking, weak, desperate, muffled by layers of snow and wind. Jonas pushed open the barn doors and found Owen standing there, cradling his young daughter, his wife behind him, faces blue with cold. Their cabin had reached 10 degrees. Their firewood was gone. The storm had turned their home into a trap. Jonas didn't say a word. He just opened the second set of doors, the airlock, and waved them inside. Warmth wrapped around the family like a blanket as soon as they stepped into the buffer zone. Word spread fast. By sundown, 2 more families arrived, nearly frozen, barely standing. The barn became a sanctuary, the inner cabin became a lifeboat, and the design everyone mocked became the only structure in the valley keeping human beings alive. The storm raged for 10 days, 10 long, brutal days, and every hour of it proved Jonas right. 9. Neighbors break. Pride versus survival. By the 3rd night of the storm, pride had frozen harder than the ground outside. The same men who once stood tall with confidence, men who mocked Jonas with a smile and a shake of the head, were now walking through waist-high drifts with their families in tow. each step slower and heavier than the last. Winter has a way of humbling a man without saying a single word. It strips away bravado, melts excuses, and leaves only the truth. You either prepared right or you didn't.
Thank you.
Inside the barn, the air hung thick with the warmth of bodies, blankets, and the steady, patient burn of the cabin stove. Jonas never raised his voice, never scolded, never reminded anyone of their earlier laughter. He simply handed out hot water, wrapped shivering shoulders with old quilts, and checked fingers and toes for frostbite. He moved quietly, with the calm focus of someone who knew panic wasted more heat than it ever saved. Owen tried to thank him, voice cracking from cold and shame. I was wrong, Jonas. Jonas didn't look up from tending the fire. A man who admits he's wrong stays alive longer than one who won't. Now warm your family. We'll talk when the wind stops screaming. As the storm raged through the night, the barn seemed to breathe. The outer shell shook, the timbers groaned, but the inner cabin held a steady warmth that felt, compared to the outside, not just comforting, but miraculous. Kids dozed on blankets in the loft. Women boiled snow for drinking water. Men took shifts checking the barn doors, making sure the airlock held strong. You could see it in their eyes, the realization that everything they believed about heat, shelter, and winter was flawed. And yet here they were, alive, because an old man had been brave enough to think differently. Pride had no place in that barn, only gratitude, relief, and the quiet awe of people seeing wisdom where they once saw foolishness. In the dead of night, as the wind rattled the barn siding like bones knocking together, Jonas whispered something I'll never forget. Storms don't break people. They reveal who's willing to learn. 10. After the storm, consequences and revelations. On the 11th morning, the storm finally let go of the valley like a fist unclenching. The wind slowed to a whisper. The sky brightened from iron gray to pale blue, and the silence that followed was so complete it made your ears ring. But the stillness didn't bring peace. It brought reality. Families stepped out of the barn into a landscape that looked carved by some angry god. Snowdrifts towered 10 feet high in places, sculpted into hard, curved ridges by days of relentless wind. The air sparkled with ice crystals, floating like diamond dust in the dawn light. But the beauty of the scene disguised the damage beneath it. Owen's cabin leaned so far to one side it looked drunk. The tar paper had torn clean off the north wall. Inside, the water bucket was a solid block of ice. A chair had frozen to the floorboards. And the bed frame, once warm and welcoming, was rimmed with white frost thick as a man's thumb. Eli and Martha's place had survived structurally, but the walls dripped with condensation that had turned to ice, cracking the boards. Their pantry was ruined. Their stovepipe had warped from overheating. They'd burned through almost every stick of wood they owned. A cabin farther down the creek had fared even worse. Half the roof collapsed under the weight of wind-packed snow. Thankfully, its owners had come to Jonas's barn days earlier. Everywhere you looked, the storm had kept score, and the ledger showed exactly which houses respected winter, and which houses angered it. But Jonas's barn? It stood tall, scarred only by a few missing shingles and some rattled siding. The drifts piled against its windward side had become insulation. Inside, the air still held the warmth of the families who had sheltered there, and the inner cabin remained the warmest structure in the valley by far. Owen approached Jonas quietly, head lowered, holding a battered notebook and a pencil so short it looked like a toothpick. Jonas, can you show me how to rebuild? I don't want to make the same mistakes twice. Jonas took the notebook gently. Winter is the best teacher, he said. It just charges the highest tuition. And right there in the dazzling post-storm sunlight, surrounded by wrecked homes and humbled men, the valley experienced something rare. A collective moment of revelation. The storm hadn't just broken cabins, it had broken old assumptions. 11. The transformation, the community learns. Once the first thaw loosened the snowpack, the valley turned into a construction site powered not by pride but by purpose. Men who once scoffed at Jonas's ideas now gathered around him like students around a seasoned craftsman. The old man walked the valley with a stick in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other, sketching diagrams in the dirt while neighbors clustered around, nodding as if hearing gospel. The first to rebuild was Owen. Instead of tearing down what remained of his cabin, He salvaged the lumber and built a sturdy inner shelter inside his grain shed. Jonas helped him measure a 7-foot buffer zone, just enough space for the wind to starve before reaching the inner walls. They added straw bales around the base, punched 2 breathing vents near the roofline, and lined the interior with tight planed boards. When Owen lit the stove for the first time, the difference was immediate. "It feels gentle in here," he said, as if discovering a new species of warmth. Next came Eli and Martha. Their home was too damaged to save, so Jonas showed them how to build a new cottage inside an abandoned supply shop on their property. It wasn't pretty, not the way homesteaders like their houses to be, but it held heat so well they ended up burning 1/3 less wood than the year before. A family up the ridge converted an old rail box car into an exterior shell and built a snug 1-room cabin inside it. Another dug out an old storage barn and created a lean-to shelter inside the lean-to itself, creating a triple-layer design that cut their heating needs nearly in half. Everywhere you looked, people were adapting, learning, experimenting. Jonas's ideas weren't copied word for word. They were reinterpreted, expanded, combined with Scandinavian double-wall methods, Lakota wind shadow strategies, and local ingenuity. The valley evolved, not because someone forced it to, but because survival demanded it. Slowly, the laughter turned into curiosity, curiosity into understanding, understanding into respect. And in the evenings, when the day's work ended and the men gathered on Jonas's porch for a cup of coffee and a soft-spoken lesson about airflow or heat pockets, you could see the transformation in their eyes. They weren't just building differently, they were thinking differently. And that, more than anything, was Jonas's real victory. 12. Closing. The frontier wisdom. By the time spring fully thawed the valley, the sound of hammers and handsaws had become the rhythm of our days. But even as new cabins rose inside old shells, even as neighbors rebuilt their homes with lessons hard-earned, the real transformation wasn't in the wood or the nails, it was in the people. For generations, frontier life taught men to face winter with brute force, bigger fires, thicker coats, stronger wills. But Jonas Hale had shown us something different. He'd shown us that survival doesn't always belong to the strongest, or the fastest, or even the most prepared. It belongs to the ones who understand the land well enough to work with it, not against it. As the last patches of snow melted off the fields, Jonas and I stood at the edge of his property, watching the valley breathe again. Children ran between cabins. Smoke curled gently from stoves that no longer had to fight the wind. And the barn, that old leaning barn that once looked like it couldn't survive a strong shrug, now stood as a quiet monument to the winter that changed everything. "You know," Jonas said, leaning on the fence rail, "most folks think staying warm is about burning more wood. But warmth isn't what you make, it's what you keep." He tapped the rail with a knuckle. "A man who understands wind understands warmth." Then he turned to me with a look so clear, so steady, it felt like he was passing down a torch older than both of us. "There's a lesson in every storm, and the ones that hit hardest, they're the storms that show you who you were and who you need to become." I asked him what he meant. His answer stayed with me. People laughed because they couldn't see what I saw. But that's all right. Men don't need to agree with you to learn from you. You just have to hold your ground long enough for the truth to reveal itself. The old man didn't boast. He didn't remind anyone he'd been right. He simply lived as though wisdom wasn't something you speak, it was something you proved. And in proving it, he saved lives, shaped a valley, and sparked a generation of builders who now approached winter with the cunning of engineers, not the hopefulness of amateurs. And here's what I want you to take from this story. Whether you live on the frontier, in the mountains, on a farm, or in a small modern home, the principles Jonas taught apply to all of us. Protection beats force. Smart design beats strong fuel. And understanding the enemy, whether that enemy is cold, or fear, or doubt, will always serve you better than running from it. You don't need a barn to build inside another barn. You don't need a storm to prove your ideas. What you do need is the courage to think differently, the patience to learn from the land, and the humility to know that nature, in the end, always has the final say. So as you step back into your own life, your own winter, whatever form it takes, remember Jonas Hale, the old man who let the whole valley laugh while he built the warmest home anyone had ever seen. Remember that warmth comes from wisdom, not ego. From design, not luck. From seeing what others cannot and doing what others will not. And if this story reminded you of the power of old world knowledge, or sparked something inside you, a curiosity, a sense of possibility, maybe even a little courage to try things differently, then join me here on Frontier Ways, because we've got more stories to tell. Stories of quiet men, forgotten techniques, and lessons carved by wind, ice, and time. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and share it with someone who could use a little frontier wisdom in their life. Out here, knowledge isn't just something you keep, it's something you pass on. And until our paths cross again, friend, stay warm, stay curious, and stay resilient.